I want to welcome you all to the History Center, and I know for some of you it's your first time in, and I want to thank you for being here and celebrating this event with us. We're really excited about the Centennial Awards every year, but particularly for this year because one of the things that it aligns with is the kickoff of a year-long project that we're focusing on African American history in Lake Forest, which is a history worth celebrating. It's a relatively untold story in historical institutions like this one, and we want to rectify that. And I'm really pleased to be partnering with Sue on some of her projects and to be expanding our reach of this narrative in our collections. So we're really pleased to have you here, and we want to thank you for your support and your attendance of this event. And we have several lectures coming up that will cover all aspects of both collecting this history and then stories from the histories of Lake Forest over the course of the summer and the fall. You can, this is me propagandizing, you can join our newsletter on our website at lflbhistory.org, and you will get regular emails that tell you about the upcoming events, and there will be no charge for any of the events. It's part of the grant that we got from the National Endowment of the Humanities in support of this project that allows this program to be free. Did I forget anything? All right, and with that, I want to introduce you to Laurie Stein, who is the Deputy Director of the History Center and the Head of Curation. She is our crack archivist and historian, and she has spent a wealth of time putting together this particular story, and it gives you an idea of what we do. Thank you.
So I'm delighted to return to the Centennial Family Awards. We've taken a few years off with the pandemic and have not had this program since 2019. So the Centennial Family Award celebrates families, as you may guess, who've lived in Lake Forest or Lake Bluff for 100 years or more. And as many of you also may know, the History Center is celebrating our own semi-centennial this year, 50 years. So compared to these families' tenures, we're sort of relative newcomers, right? But our Centennial Awards program started in 2006, and since then we have honored 34 local families. So the Lawson-Jordan family this year will be the 35th. I know I have seen a few people here from who are previous Centennial Family Award nominees. Can you raise your hands if you are? Oh, wonderful. It's definitely a way that we have made longtime collaborators and members of the History Center as well over the years. So this program, collaborating with local families, has always been one of my favorite things to work on at the History Center. What connects so many people to history is not necessarily sort of the glorious moments, but learning about what everyday life was like, right? So it's so essential for us to collect these stories so they're there for historians of the future, but it's also essential for us to share them with the community today so we can all see how the stories of other local families overlap and intersect, or how they might diverge from and converge with each other and with our own stories. So using both photographs and stories that the Lawson-Jordan family has been kind enough to share with us, I'll now give you a sketch of their history in Lake Forest. So we're going to begin with the family's local story in the 1890s with Walker Sales. He was born in 1864 in Morganfield, Kentucky, and came to Lake Forest around 1890. In the 1900 census, Sales and his family were among about 100 black residents living in the town of about 2,200 people. So Lake Forest African American community dated to the years right after the Civil War, just as the town was founded, and grew through the late 1800s, given prospects of steady employment, of integrated public schools, and tight-knit neighborhoods of homes that drove migration from both the upper and middle South, often through word of mouth and familial connections, as we'll see. By the year 1900, 2 churches served the local black community: the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is at Maplewood and Washington, which is part of Lake Forest College's campus now, and First Baptist Church, which was founded that very year and was then still searching for a home. So in Lake Forest, Walker Sales first worked as a coachman for the Rumsey family, for Captain Israel Parsons Rumsey, a Union Army veteran. And he and his family lived at a home called the Evergreens at 404 East Deer Path, which was just east of today's Lake Forest Library. While he was working for the Rumseys, Walker Sales lived on the upper floor of the coach house at 361 East Westminster, which is pictured here, with his wife, Tisha, and their children. And if this building looks familiar to some of you, it should. It was the previous home of the Historical Society for nearly 200 years and was only recently demolished. So by 1900, Walker Sales was part of the two-man Lake Forest police force. He worked as the night officer, and James Gordon was the daytime patrol. And he was hired on a regular basis after serving on special assignment, which is detailed in the article up there at the left. He apparently acquired the evidence necessary to prosecute a blind pig, to convict a man named Mr. Ast of selling liquor without a license. This was possibly a man named George Ast, who was a grocer in Libertyville at the time. And so, he had succeeded at this, and so they hired him on full time. He served as a member of the police department in Lake Forest for nearly 20 years. And as the two articles that I've pulled at the right can attest, his night duty was at times full of incident, like with this attempted robbery that he foiled, which says, quote, "This morning around 3 a.m., a man was detected by policeman Walker Sales trying to get into Mrs. Holt's residence on Sheridan. When detected, the man ran, and Sales gave chase, firing 2 shots at the fleeing burglar. One passed through the man's hat, knocking it off his head, but he succeeded in effecting his escape, minus the hat." Other nights, most nights, I think, were much more tame, like in the lower article, where Sales was drawn upon as confirmation of some unseasonably snowy September weather for the local news reporter, since, of course, he had been awake at that time. Unfortunately, during this period, the young Sales family met with some tragedy. 1-year-old Mildred died in 1896. His wife, Tisha, died of consumption in 1903. And 2 of his sons died of bronchial pneumonia in 1904. And so only Sales' oldest daughter, Mamie, who had been born in 1889, survived into adulthood. After he began working for the police department, Walker Sales and Mamie left the Rumsey coach house and rented rooms in a house on Wisconsin Avenue. The 1908 city directory lists him residing with Mamie, who was by then working as a dressmaker, and they were boarding there with a woman named America Bridgeman, a black woman who ran her own laundry business. In November of 1910, Walker Sales and America Bridgeman were married in Waukegan. So during his time on the police force, the department grew from 2 officers to 5 by 1919. With the advent of the automobile and starting to regulate traffic, they needed more officers. And his salary and that of others as well increased from $50 a month to $100 a month in that period. As the night officer, he was often on call for burglary cases, and among his many duties included keeping watch during the off-season on shuttered Lake Forest residences. Local newspapers, while remaining complimentary, periodically felt the need to sort of explicate the role of a black policeman in a North Shore community. The Chicago Tribune wrote, for example, quote, "In winter, when many of the residents closed their homes, they often left Keyes in charge of Sales, trusting him with thousands of dollars worth of furnishings. He was reputed to be a brave man and crack pistol shot." The Lake Forester wrote that, quote, "The night was never too dark, nor the request too impossible for Walker to undertake to be obliging. Hundreds and hundreds of little things that another man would never think of helped to make him popular." Another Tribune article, the one up at the left there, from late 1916, as the U.S. role as sort of the supplier for the war-torn European countries drove up the prices of many material goods in the U.S., it featured Walker Sales and his innovation of apparently using broken down car tires to sole his shoes. He said, "The high cost of living can't scare me. I used to be a chauffeur, and I still have a fine limousine tire left. I found out that the cobblers, they have nothing, they have no supplies, so the cobblers are using paper. So I just tacked on a hunk of automobile tire. I gave a piece to Ferd Berghorn on the fire department, and that's what makes him so fast." Berghorn, of course, being a member of another of our Centennial families. On March 3rd, 1919, Walker Sales died following complications from asthma and heart trouble. And his funeral was held at First Baptist Church. He was buried in Lake Forest Cemetery. And after his death, the Lake Forest City Council passed a resolution, quote, "Whereas over 15 years, Mr. Sales has served the city faithfully and efficiently, and by his kind and sterling character and faithful discharge of duty, has won the approbation of the City Council and officials of the city, as well as the citizens of Lake Forest." So we haven't yet tracked down a photo of America Bridgeman Sales, but I hope to at some point. She was born around 1876 in Pikeville, Tennessee, to William and Sarah Bridgeman, and her wedding notice lists her as a graduate of Fisk University. She had made her way up to Lake Forest before 1908. After Walker Sales passed on, she continued to live at the house at 321 Granby. And she continued to operate her laundry business until her own death in 1938. Her obituary in the Lake Forester, which you can see mistakenly refers to her as Mrs. Amanda Sales, states that Mrs. Sales was proud of two things during her lifetime: that she had always been able to support herself, and of the splendid record made by her husband Walker as a member of the local police force. The obit on the bottom there only lists a couple of siblings as survivors, but this was really quite misleading, as I discovered. Although she had no children of her own, she was really nonetheless a matriarch. Her house was a social center of early 20th century Lake Forest, and not only did she serve as a stepmother to Walker Sales' daughter, but her home was sort of a launching point and place of refuge for countless extended family members, uncles, nieces, nephews, and others, as we'll see. So one such nephew of America Bridgeman Sales is pictured here, William Lawson, who was born in 1890 in Pikeville, Tennessee, to America's older sister, Arminta, and Jasper Lawson. And Pikeville is a rural town north of Chattanooga, which had a population of about 500 in 1920. Most members of the family worked as farm laborers at the time. So Lawson's pictured here in his World War I uniform with his draft registration card and transport record overseas. He served as a private in Company B of the 368th Infantry in the 92nd Division, which was one of the U.S.'s all-black divisions in the war. And I think the only one to serve under the Americans, as the others served under the French. After their arrival in France, these soldiers were deployed to the front lines in August of 1918, and the division saw action primarily in one of the last Allied operations of the war, the Argonne Offensive, that began in September and ended with the armistice. So shortly before departing for Europe, William Lawson married fellow Pikeville resident Sarah Leticia Spring. And in late December 1918, their son William Jr. was born, after the armistice, but very possibly before his father was able to make the journey back from overseas. By the mid-1920s, the Lawson family had made their way to Lake Forest, where Aunt America Bridgeman Sales helped them get settled. And William Lawson Jr. attended elementary school in Lake Forest. By 1930, the census shows the family running a grocery store in Chicago. So here we're going to leave this side of the family briefly. We'll get back to them, but we're going to track back in time to meet the other side. So in 1850, the woman pictured here, Mary Decoursey, was born into slavery in Liberty, Missouri, which is located northeast of Kansas City in one of the Missouri counties most closely aligned with the Confederacy. And her parents, Joe and Maria, were enslaved by a wealthy landowner, J.T.V. Thompson. He later gave Joe and Maria as a wedding gift to his daughter upon her marriage to T.W. Decoursey. On January 11th, 1865, following Missouri's proclamation of freedom, Joe, Maria, and their daughter Mary were freed, and Joe and Maria were finally legally able to marry and begin a life, and Mary was permitted to learn and go to school. In 1874, Mary Decoursey married William Slaughter. Their marriage record is shown below here. Over the course of nearly 25 years, they had 11 children, many of whom we'll meet. What's pictured here is a Google Maps view of 325 Harrison Street in Liberty, Missouri, which seems to be a home built by William Slaughter around 1880, and maybe where he and Mary raised their family. According to a web memorial dedicated to Liberty's African-American history, this house is located right across the road from the property line where Mary Decoursey's parents had been originally enslaved. Mary's husband, William Slaughter, served in the Union Army in the Civil War as a teamster in the 13th Missouri Cavalry, Company C. He worked as a farmer and as a butcher, along with serving as a deacon in the Liberty Baptist Church. So pictured here are 8 of the 11 children of the Slaughter family, all 4 daughters and 4 of the 7 sons. And I love the photograph of the sisters in particular, with the quilt in the backdrop, taken outside that Harrison Street house in Liberty. If I track back real quick, the photo of their mother, Mary, was also taken in front of a quilt, possibly the same one. So there are always more stories like that to uncover. So in the early years of the 20th century, 6 of these Slaughter siblings, more than half, would end up migrating to Lake Forest. One of the first was William Slaughter Jr., who was born in 1883, and he was living in town by 1907, when the newspaper noted his marriage to Ludi McIntosh. By 1910, he was advertising a vacuum cleaning business in the Lake Forester newspaper. Anna Slaughter, who's the oldest daughter of the family, was settled in Lake Forest by 1910 when the census lists her here with her husband, Charles Gray, who was then working as a coachman. And the Grays lived at 341 Granby, just down the street from Walker and America Sales. Charles Gray later operated a riding academy out of a stable on Bank Lane, located near where Lake Forest Bank and Trust is today. The Grays were social leaders of Lake Forest's Black community. Charles Gray served as president of the Baptist Church's Progressive Literary Society. He served as the chairman of one of Lake Forest's World War I municipal gardens, planted to maintain local food supplies during the war. And he served as president of something called the Citizens Moral Protective League, which was formed among residents of color in 1923. Also in Lake Forest by 1910 was Elizabeth Slaughter, who had been born in 1889 and was then listed in the census as working as a domestic servant in a private home. And she later married Jerry Burris Coleman. The pair first lived on Spruce and then later at 1388 Edgewood, where their 4 children grew up. This home no longer stands. The back parking lot for the high school is located there today. It seems that the oldest Coleman child, Jerry Jr., was a budding journalist, or one of the Jerrys in the family was at least. By the mid-1930s, he was reporting about local happenings for the Chicago Defender, the renowned Black newspaper. Unfortunately, Jerry Jr. was not strong in health and an enlarged heart, and was hospitalized and ultimately died at a young age, only 18, in 1939. And his brother Bill, 2 years younger, fell ill and died less than a month later. Family lore is that the 2 brothers were so close that Bill died of a broken heart. Pictured here is their younger sister, Frances Coleman, who graduated from Lake Forest High School in 1945 and went on to study at Lake Forest College. As a young woman, she decided to make a change and see more of the world. She bought a Chevy Impala Super Sport yellow convertible with a black top, drove out to California, and looked for a job. Later, when asked how old she was when she went to California, she responded that she was, quote, quite young, but old enough to vote. She continued, I had never been anywhere, and that made me quite mad, always in the same place. So I just decided I would go to California. I bought a car, I bought maps and put them all around my living room so I would know where I was going to stop first and where I was going next. I went out there and I was hired the same day because there was a young woman who worked in one of the offices that I worked at, and she recommended me to these lawyers in Beverly Hills. So when I got there, they hired me. Following that job, she worked at Paramount Pictures as a legal secretary, and then she worked for TV writers and producers Norman Lear and Bud Yorkin when they were starting out. So her uncle, another one of the Slaughter siblings, Bealy Slaughter, born in 1880, joined his siblings in Lake Forest sometime before 1913 when he and Minnie Waters were married. He had a young son, Carl, from a previous marriage, and in 1920, he was working as a handyman over at Great Lakes. He launched his own garbage hauling business in the 1920s, which you can see in the advertisement, after purchasing a Ford truck. And he went on to work for the city in that capacity as well later. Around that time, Bealy and Minnie Slaughter moved to 1359 Edgewood, one of the homes on lots you can see pictured in the map there that were long owned by the Shepherd family, which you can see labeled on the map. Living with Bealy and Minnie Slaughter was a relative of Minnie's, Edwina Jennings, who you can see pictured here doing some acrobatics in gym class at Gorton School. And she went on to marry Mitchell Whittington and lived at 1359 Edgewood for many years. Bealy's younger brother, Edgar Lawrence Slaughter, born in 1884, also relocated to Lake Forest right around 1910. Living on Oakwood Avenue, where in 1913 he opened a confectionery, which you can see advertised in the Chicago Defender there. There he served all kinds of cool drinks and delicious ice cream, sundaes, and soda. And likely he had undergone training in this line back in his hometown of Liberty, Missouri, where his oldest brother Charles, who remained there, ran a well-known confectionery shop. Now, this could have been the precursor to another sort of beverage business. Family lore has it that during Prohibition, at least one of the Slaughter brothers, we won't say who, on the down low, sold bootleg alcohol at 41 and Deer Path, helping to supply the local demand, which I can imagine once the private stocks ran out was considerable. Edgar Slaughter also worked as the local seller for the NAACP's publication, The Crisis, which you can see advertised also in the Defender. By the 1920s, Edgar Slaughter was working as a caretaker and gardener over at the Larned Estate on Deer Path, and he was living in one of the estate outbuildings with the family. And on one occasion, his wife Deborah frightened away attempted burglars by interrupting their search for valuables and calling the police. But looks like they didn't find a lot. They left some groceries and 2 dresses, it says. So this is a picture of Edgar and Deborah Slaughter's daughter, Mildred, who was born in 1916. And like other women in her family, Mildred Slaughter was very involved in the local YWCA, the Young Women's Christian Association, which met on the 2nd floor of the Marshall Field Building in Market Square. And Mildred Slaughter became the president of the Keep Tryst Girl Reserves, precursor to the Girl Scouts, leading the troop of local African American girls. The group's advisor for a time in the 1930s was the famed flapper, dancer, and performer Irene Castle McLaughlin, who had settled in Lake Forest after marriage and semi-retirement, and she helped them put on a number of different shows, which must have been fascinating. Graduating from high school as an honor student, Mildred Slaughter went on to attend college at the Hampton Institute for a few years before returning to Lake Forest College, where she wrote for the literary magazine, and you can see her pictured with her fellow literary colleagues there. After graduation, she took on an advisory role with the Lake Forest YWCA and taught classes in Waukegan before taking a paid position at the Phyllis Wheatley Association of Cleveland, then referred to as the Black YWCA. She later went on to study social science at Northwestern and lived in Connecticut, working for the YWCA in Hartford and marrying Gibson Young. So I love this photo, which shows an extended Slaughter family reunion around 1950 or so. This features both siblings who relocated to Lake Forest, like William, Betty, and Anna, who are all standing up in the middle there, but also Laura, Robert, and Henry, who stayed local to the Liberty area, who are all seated in the middle there. So the last Slaughter sibling to come to Lake Forest in the early 1900s was Betty, who was born in 1887. In her early 20s, she traveled to Lake Forest to visit her older sister, Anna Gray, and attend a church picnic. The visit extended from days to weeks to months, and she never really left after that. However beautiful and charming the city of Lake Forest can claim to be, this was not the only attraction for Bettie Slaughter. She also met the man who would shortly become her husband, Washington Jordan, who was born in 1885 in Nashville, Tennessee. And by 1910, he was listed in the census as living in Lake Forest. At that time, he was lodging with a man named Chauncey Tibbetts, who was the superintendent of Melody Farm, the J. Ogden Armour estate. So it's possible that Washington Jordan was working there for a bit. The inspiration for this wonderful photograph was perhaps that he went on to work as a chauffeur for the mayor of Lake Forest, Keen H. Addington. His son, Alphonso Jordan, recalled how when the Northwestern train came in, exactly 5:55 p.m., all the chauffeurs would arrive in the station and they would back their cars into the same spots every night. So woe betide anyone who tried to shake that up. So Bettie Slaughter and Washington Jordan married and soon started a family, as you can see from the couple newspaper notices here. The one on the left from the Chicago Defender, I love this, announced the birth of first daughter Eloise in 1913, and it says, "The proudest man in Lake Forest at this writing, and the man who wears a smile that won't come off, is Mr. Washington Jordan, who was greeted at a very early hour Saturday morning from the Stork Limited with a fine baby girl." So Bettie and Washington Jordan went on to have 8 children, though 3 sadly died as infants or in early childhood. 5 grew up in Lake Forest, and we'll meet them shortly. However, as befits a couple who met at a church picnic, Washington and Bettie Jordan were very involved at First Baptist Church, which is pictured here in the 1960s, and again more recently, although it hasn't changed too much. Washington Jordan is one of the early church deacons who's referenced, as you can see there, on the cornerstone, which was erected as the church building underwent numerous physical improvements in the early 1900s. So the Jordan family and the Slaughter family were involved in all aspects of church activities and events. There were book clubs, social clubs, bridge clubs, there was the Joy Club for young people, bake sales, welcoming ceremonies for new pastors, men's church relief in the Great Depression, you name it. Washington Jordan also served as the troop leader for the Boy Scout troop organized at First Baptist Church, which included his son, Alphonso. So in the early 1920s, the growing Jordan family was living in a home on Bank Lane, and Washington Jordan worked as a janitor and laborer in private homes. He would go from estate to estate lighting fires, cleaning flues, for example. But with commercial development along Bank Lane and Oakwood in the early 19-teens, 20s, and 30s, including the new bank, the Deer Path Inn south of Deer Path, and Market Square and the post office north of Deer Path, most of the African-American residents and businesses that had been located in these areas had to relocate. So Washington Jordan built a new home for the family at 441 Spruce Avenue in 1925, right in the midst of the growing black neighborhood at Spruce and Edgewood. Sided with stucco, the home always stayed very cool in the summer. Even with a family of 7, the Jordan family stayed solid through the Great Depression, maintaining their 2-car household. Bettie Jordan was also employed, taking in laundry and doing other day work around the community. And she apparently kept meticulous account books. One of those passed down to her descendants even indicates that entertainer Jack Benny, whose father, Mayor Kubelski, had a tailor shop in Market Square, still owes her a few dollars. So I'm not sure what this translates to with inflation, but it could be worth checking into. So we'll go back for a second. That Spruce Avenue neighborhood, the families, helped prop each other up through the Depression. They would trade goods grown in gardens, keep chickens. The Jordans had a peach tree, and their neighbors, the Sadlers, had a plum tree, and everyone would exchange fruit for preserves. So the house, of course, still stands on Spruce, although much of the surrounding neighborhood has changed quite a bit and has remained in the same family for nearly 100 years. So the Jordan home's located just around the corner from where Sheridan School is today, but back in the 1920s, a large residence was located there. And it was inhabited at the time by former Lake Forest College football star and Major League Baseball player Fred Hainer and his family. And Hainer had gone on to work as a sports writer for the Chicago Daily News and is actually one of those credited with coining the name Cubs for the Chicago baseball team. In January 1929, the Hainer house suffered a devastating fire. And their neighbor, Washington Jordan, was the first to spot the smoke and flames. His quick call of the fire department, very possibly, is what allowed the firefighters to rescue Mrs. Hainer and the 2 boys. Sadly, Fred Hainer perished in the blaze, having earlier gone down to the basement, which was the source of the fire, to see why the electric lights in the house had gone out. So Alphonso Jordan was the oldest of the Jordan children, born in 1912, and he was involved with Boy Scouts, with athletics, and worked as a caddy at the Enwencia Club, getting up early to arrive by 6 a.m. and be one of the first caddies out on Sunday mornings to get the best jobs. After high school, he played for the Gold Coasters softball team, which was made up of local black players and competed against various community teams from around the area. He recalled that the games against the Robertsons team, the men's shop, were the most competitive. In 1942, he married Beulah Jones of Waukegan, and they lived at 1373 Edgewood. As a young man, he got a job stocking shelves at a local grocery store, Consumers Grocery, and moved on to Community Service Grocery, located where Starbucks is today, for 13 years, doing everything from delivering and burning the trash down in the basement to becoming shipping clerk and waiting on customers, according to a 1978 Feature article, which is where some of these photos are from. Then for 34 years, he worked for Janowitz's Finest Foods at 293 Illinois, which is, I think, where Francesca's is today, right? And there he waited on the trade and filled orders. Children apparently called him the Cookie Man in honor of the treats he could always be counted on to supply them with. And even in retirement, he continued to work. He would sell newspapers in front of Walgreens and greet customers at the Lake Forest Winery. So here we see the oldest Jordan daughter, Eloise, pictured here from that newspaper clipping about the stork. Family members aren't sure exactly what dish is on display here in this wonderful photo, but are certain it was quite delicious. In this multi-generational photo, Eloise Jordan Pearson is surrounded by her family, son Eddie McCampbell and daughter Loretta Jordan, who married Fred Sadler, with their children Gregory, Michael, and Christopher, and then along, of course, with the elder generation, her mother and aunt and uncle. So Eddie McCampbell, pictured here, grew up on Spruce Avenue, and in school was involved in band, as you can see from this wonderful photo taken in Market Square, along with football, track, and wrestling. And he also had jobs growing up at Hahn Brothers and Janowitz's groceries, very possibly with his uncle Alphonso there to keep him on the straight and narrow. And he went on to marry Veronica Landry and reside in Evanston. Here we have Alphonso and Eloise's sister, Zenobia Jordan, called Toby by the family, who married Clifford Logan in 1935. And then she later followed in the footsteps of her cousin Frances Coleman and went out to California, where she worked for the actor Raymond Burr, best known for Perry Mason and Rear Window and others. So definitely a few film and Hollywood connections in the family, for sure. So born in 1924, Leroy was the youngest of the 5 Jordan siblings, and he ran track in high school and was in the orchestra, like his nephew Eddie. According to this article, he and Clarence McIntosh played drum and piano at the junior prom in 1941, which must have been a good time. And he served as a private in the U.S. Army in World War II. Like their many local cousins, the Jordans attended Lake Forest schools, Halsey School and Gorton School, and then, depending on their age, either Deerfield Shields High School or Lake Forest High School. So here you can see a photo of Marietta Jordan at top left in braids with one of her classes at Halsey, probably 4th or 5th grade around 1929. You can see the boys in the front row displaying some truly impressive socks. And from the expression of most of the students in this picture, including Marietta, it looks like it was quite a hot day, and this was perhaps not the first take of this photo. While at Halsey, Marietta and her sister Zenobia were both listed in the newspaper as on the Thrift Honor Roll, which recognized students who had made deposits in their school savings account every week over the summer. This picture shows Gorton School students around 1933 or 34 when Marietta Jordan graduated from 8th grade. You can see her pictured again at the top left, again with braids. So Marietta Jordan was the youngest of the 3 Jordan sisters. She was born in 1920, and she graduated from high school in 1938, one of the very first graduating classes at the new Lake Forest High School building, and went on to enroll at Tennessee State College, as you can see from this excerpt. So now we'll pick up a thread we dropped a little bit ago and return to the Lawson family. So you'll remember that William Lawson Jr. was the great-nephew of America Bridgeman Sales, the redoubtable woman who supported herself and introduced so many relatives from Pikeville, Tennessee to Lake Forest, including the Lawsons. But William Lawson's mother, Sarah Lawson, she died at a young age in 1934. And that prompted William Sr. and Jr. to leave Lake Forest, returning to their hometown eventually of Pikeville. So when he registered for the draft in 1942, William Lawson Jr. was working for the Tennessee Valley Authority, which you can see from this, which was, of course, a New Deal program that brought electrification and regional planning and economic development to the Tennessee Valley area. He was living at the time with his grandmother, Queen Anne Spring, in Pikeville. During World War II, William Lawson served as a sergeant, training soldiers for combat at a camp in the southern U.S. Marietta Jordan and William Lawson had met back in the 1920s when she was in kindergarten at Halsey. He was living on Granby Road and attending Lake Forest schools as well. And they continued to keep in touch even after he left town. When Marietta's first marriage broke up in the 1940s, her cousin Frances Coleman Tate wrote to William Lawson telling him to, quote, come back quick, because Marietta was available, but maybe wouldn't be for very long. So he did, and Frances took credit for getting them back together. After they married, Marietta and William Lawson, along with Marietta's young daughter from her first marriage, Mary Agnes Maxwell, lived for a time at 1371 Edgewood, pictured in the map up top, in one of the houses on the lot owned by the Shepherd family we mentioned earlier. William had a job as the custodian at the post office, where he would work for 25 years. By the late 1950s, the family was living in the home that Marietta's father, Washington Jordan, had built, 441 Spruce. So the children grew up in this house, which you can see in the background of the photo on the right. William and Marietta had 2 more daughters in the 1950s, Deborah, called Debbie, and Phyllis Elizabeth, called Sue or Susie. They lived right around the corner from the new Sheridan Elementary School, which was built in 1957, And here you can see a photo of Debbie's kindergarten class, taught by Miss Lawson. Some of the students look a little skeptical, but she is clearly all about it, so I love this picture. All three attended Lake Forest High School. We dug out the senior photos from the Forest Trails yearbook. You can see some of the many things they were involved with as students, some of which, like Future Teachers of America for Debbie and Telecom and Crew for Sue, prefigured future careers. Mary's senior yearbook did not include lists of activities, but hers were also extensive, including National Honor Society, Music Club, a cappella choir, orchestra, Latin Club, and many more. All three were involved in Girl Scouts and in the Girls Athletic Association, and this was on top of part-time summer jobs. Mary at a laundromat, as a shampoo girl at Terry's Beauty Shop, Debbie at the Lake Bluff Children's Center, and Sue at Gorton Community Center in Fort Sheridan. Here also, we can't miss these, are two high school dance photos. Debbie's is prom and Sue's is from homecoming. I know, she's back there. I think she's seeing it. So here's a rare photo of all three together, all three sisters together in the 1970s. Sue, Mary, and her son Owen Thomas, and Debbie. So Mary Maxwell Thomas went on to graduate from University of Chicago Law School and was later the first African-American assistant city attorney in the city of Evanston, served as assistant U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Illinois, and in 1987 was appointed by the Illinois Supreme Court to fill a vacancy as a circuit judge of Cook County, where she served until 2006. The photo on the right here shows Mary Maxwell Thomas with Nelson Mandela in 1993 at an event for Operation Push, People United to Save Humanity. Debbie Lawson attended Illinois State and became a teacher, working for years at Forrestal School in North Chicago, and she has long been involved with the Lake County Federation of Teachers, just the picture here, including as president. And she continues to live at 441 Spruce. So here we have a wedding photo. Sue married Bruce Himmelblau in 1986. And Sue attended Drake University and went on to a career as a film editor and director. Here you can see her pictured in 2005 at the Women in Film and Television International's Women of Achievement Awards, pictured with the actress Doris Roberts. And here we have a 1990s era family photo of the whole crew with Marietta Lawson second from left. She passed away in 1996, and both she and William Lawson are buried at Lake Forest Cemetery. This 1970s era photo, which has some truly excellent plaid and striped pants. Love this. It's coming back too. Includes the family's newer generation, several of the great-grandchildren of Washington and Bettie Jordan, including Christopher Sadler, Stacy Thomas, Greg McCampbell, Stephanie McCampbell, and Michael Sadler. Here we see Stacy Thomas again, receiving her doctorate from National Louis University, her brother Owen graduating from Southern University and A&M College in Baton Rouge, and Stacy's son, Nate Mosley, running track here for Waukegan Invaders, but he also ran at Tennessee State in North Carolina, AT&T. One thing that came up a few times was the family tradition of gathering for Christmas, whether at 441 Spruce, the home that's been in the family for nearly 100 years, or elsewhere. It's been a way to maintain connections through the decades. All right, so on that note, we'll conclude this review of the Centennial family's long history in Lake Forest. We could go on for hours, there's so many stories, but for that now, I'd like to ask our Executive Director, Carol Summerfield, to come up to help me with the presentation of the award. So here it is. So we are extremely delighted to present the 2022 Centennial Family Award. The award's not just a celebration, it's also a recognition of the dedication that our nominee family has made in researching and documenting their family history, which is truly impressive. And they should be commended for the information they've pulled together, and of course for their willingness to share it with all of us and to be documented at the History Center. So I'd like to recognize the Lawson-Jordan family, and then I'll have the family's representative come to the podium to accept the award. So, will members of the Lawson-Jordan family here today please stand or wave? All right. Congratulations. Okay, you may be seated. So this nomination was prepared by Sue Lawson. Can Sue come up, please?
But this is her research. This is her baby. She did an outstanding job. And huge thanks to everybody involved with the History Center here for going ahead and recognizing the fact that African Americans were here back then.
Yes, I was going to say the story will continue on in a wonderful documentary that we hope to see in the next couple years, so it'll be great. All right, thank you all, and we'll gather the family members up here for a photo, and then of course you're welcome to break for refreshments. Thank you all for coming.